Hi there, birders. Steve and Jim, EarlyBirderNet. This is the introduction to our How to Bird educational series, where hopefully we'll encompass everything that you need to know to get out and start birding yourself. So in this first video, we'd like to just start by talking about what birding is, at least to us.
What we've learned along the way. Just the tips and tricks kind of that we picked up and how we got started and how you can get out there and get going yourself. Just straight up from the front, you can start this with basically no money involved. A lot of the basic stuff you can look up on Google on identifying certain species or whatever, just to see if you're interested or not. So before you freak out and expect to spend thousands and thousands of dollars, you can start for absolutely nothing. So,
yep. If you haven't already seen, you can kind of see what a birding trip looks like, what we do when we go out to do a bird trip and the things that we're looking for and how we're doing it. And so you can kind of see what birding is without us telling you a little bit, but this is kind of a little bit more in depth. What are we thinking? How did we learn what we learned, what we're still working on, what we haven't learned yet, and where we're going in the future, and that's what it is. So you can check out those videos separately, but we'd like to just talk about right now kind of the different levels of bird enthusiasm, basically, that lead you up to and surpassing where we're at with our pursuit of birds. I think that we wanted to set up kind of like a tier of where you start getting involved in birds and how you become eventually consumed.
completely consumed by it.
Yeah,
so from a very passive side of things to the other extreme where everything in your life is dedicated to finding another bird species, or then the deep scientific side of things where you're actively engrossed in, tagging birds, tracking their migration, studying
collecting
new species,
data,
delineating species at a DNA genetic level, things like that. So there's definitely extremes in different areas in all of it. But
we figure that it kind of essentially starts like you might be at this point where you've seen birds and you're kind of interested, but your knowledge about what birds are and where they go and the different kinds of birds and things like that is so limited that you might be at a level where you just are a natural observer. You might go for a walk in the park or go to a national park or a refuge or something like that, and you're just consuming all varieties of nature. You're looking at the flowers and the grasses and the trees, and you might see some birds and say, oh, this as a whole environment is really nice. And you enjoy it, and you don't necessarily know the species of everything that you're looking at, but it doesn't prevent you from enjoying it.
Right. You say, oh, there were a lot of colorful birds, or, that bird was doing something really unique I've never seen before.
Yeah. Or just the songs, a lot of soundtracks and things like that are created for calming nature sounds, and a lot of them have bird calls and things like that in them, and you don't listen to that and say, oh, that's this bird and that's this bird. You just relax and enjoy the sounds of the water and the birds and things like that. So there's this real basic admiration for what a bird looks like and what it can do, and the freeing nature of how they can fly around all over the planet and those kind of things. And then I think the next thing might be where you're doing some sort of targeted outing with birds in mind. And we thought the first experience that most people have is like when you're a kid and you go to a park and you go to the pond just to feed ducks.
Right. You got your little bag of bread and grandma's there, or your aunt's there, your mom's there, or whatever. You just go sit on a park bench and throw out breadcrumbs and get the ducks to come up.
And watch them. And it's fascinating because something that seems wild, it comes closer than normally they were, or maybe if you grew up on a farm or a ranch, you were around domesticated birds and things like that, and you just enjoy that aspect of it. So there's this next thing where it's not where you're going to the park to do anything else but look at the birds. Even though most of the birds at the park were domesticated at one point or another anyways. So.
Lots of Easter birds end up in the local parks.
Yeah, birds that you thought you wanted, yeah, and then eventually you...
Don't do that, by the way. It's illegal in most states.
Yeah, also, don't feed birds at the park bread because it apparently is bad for them, so... So then the next thing is something you might think of when we say birding or bird watching, those kind of things like that. A lot of people, without us even saying anything, have this mental image of what a bird watcher looks like. And that would be little old lady sitting at her kitchen table, drinking
Funny hat.
tea, and she's looking out the
Lace
window.
doily things all over the place. Small miniature
Glass collection of
children.
cats or clowns or something.
Yeah.
Dolls. And they're looking out their window and they have maybe a bird feeder hung up,
Right.
something to attract birds, something, maybe they were at the store and it was at the checkout line on the way out and they grabbed a feeder and set it up
Right.
next to their garden. And
So that's how our Oma was.
Yeah.
And she always brought in birds. She loved seeing the birds.
right.
I doubt she knows the name of any of the specific species, but she knows they're Tweety birds, they're songbirds. She likes seeing them, listening to them. That's a good way to bring them into your yard. Something, again, a little wild that seems a little more domesticated that way. It brings it into your realm a little closer to home. So.
Yeah, and she had a bird guide when we were growing up in her house, and I remember hearing birds and seeing birds on the feeders and things like that because she always kept all the feeders full, and I would see something and I would try and go to her house and get her guide. I eventually stole it. It's in my library.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Yeah, so
There we go.
I think the very first bird I ever identified was a black-capped chickadee. And then we saw a gigantic owl when we were out camping, and I went back to her house and got into her field guide and was able to identify it as a great gray owl. Now I wasn't like birding or anything like that. It was just I was seeing them and I was enjoying them and I wanted to know what they were, and that was kind of how it started. But then it kind of went away for quite a while before I started taking it seriously. But I think once you start attracting birds, the natural step, I think, if you're going to go any farther, is you're going to want to know what birds are visiting your feeder.
Yeah.
You might think that all of them are the same until you start picking through and identifying them. And then you realize that there's a lot of different birds, and you got to look really closely to start delineating how many species of birds are visiting your feeder. And some people can get tons and tons of species depending on where you live to visit your feeders, and it's a really good place. I think that a lot of people start.
Yeah, that you could build an entire landscape in your backyard specifically towards bringing birds in. Some people spend decades specifically, planting trees and plants and flowers and things like that in order to bring birds in. And then the birds remember. So once you've been doing it for years and years and years, they always return when they're migrating through. They'll return and they'll bring their friends, and it continues to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, you can create a really nice habitat to attract the birds. It's the extreme version of looking out of your window at a hummingbird feeder to creating an entire habitat in your yard for that. So then I think this is a good place to where, for me, birding started is I was living in Alaska at the time, and I had been interested in birds my whole life. I used to sit in a tree with holding seed in my hand and catching birds and things like that, waiting for them as still as I could. But then after I was an adult, moved to Alaska, I've got feed. I didn't have a feeder. I couldn't afford one, so I just had seed spread across the railing on the porch, and birds were coming to visit it, and I wanted to know what they were all of a sudden. And it was about New Year's, and I was like, man, I never do a resolution anyways, but maybe I'll make one this year. And I just want to start learning what these birds are. I've always liked them. It's time to start learning what they are. And so I think I had that guide still that I stole from Oma. And I was starting to look through, and I started identifying dark-eyed juncos and Steller's jays and orange-crowned warblers were some of the first things I saw. And then one night it was raining, and I heard an owl out in the trees behind our apartment, and I decided I was going to go up there and get it. And so I walked all around out there, and I could hear it calling, and I could hear it calling, and finally I found it with a flashlight, and something inside of me, like it was like these 2 points in my life history connected from when I was a kid seeing the owls and to this point, and I was just like, this is such an experience. And then I couldn't find my way out. I had to yell until my wife kept yelling at me, and I was able to
Lost
get out
in
of
the
the woods.
woods.
Yeah, but I kept going and going until I could find it. But once I found it, it was just this amazing thing. And then it ended up being a western screech owl, and it was awesome. And then we had there was still video rental stores, and we were there, and I saw this movie on the shelf called The Big Year. And I never heard of the book or anything like that, but I saw the movie, and on the cover it had Jack Black and Owen Wilson and Steve Martin, and they had binoculars, and there was birds on it, and I was just like, what is this? So I turned it around and I checked it out, and The Big Year made me realize that whatever I was interested in had this whole other part that I never even thought of. And I think after I watched The Big Year, that's when I had to talk to you about it. I was like, This is something that I got to be doing.
And I was living in Texas at the time, completely different environment, and he called me talking about birds and trying to figure out what they are and all this kind of nonsense, and I just thought he was a big nerd. I just told him straight up, you're just a big nerd. And I was like, what are you going to do, start looking at mushrooms and stuff next? Which he did. But anyway, that conversation made me start looking at the birds that I was seeing, which was at the time, like grackle and white-winged doves, and just simple things like pigeons and stuff like that I would see. Big ones are easiest to identify when you start.
Yeah.
But before I knew it, I was trying to identify birds. And then from there, it's just...
I feel like after he had scolded me on the phone... It was like less than a week later, he sends me a picture of what he's got on his list so far. So if you haven't seen The Big Year, it's been out for over 10 years now.
Yeah.
I think it came out in 2011 or something like that. And essentially the idea is that it's based on a true story of these 3 different guys. And what they're doing is trying to see as many species of birds in a calendar year. And it's a competition. And they travel all over the continental United States and Canada and Alaska, and the adventure and the hunt for getting as many species, something that was like the next connection that I had, where it turned it into just looking at them and identifying them and then making it into a sport or a game.
Right.
And for us, I think in general, all people, there's this kind of completionist feeling that you the more of something you have, or people hunt or people collect things, they collect coins, and that's in essentially what it is creating a collection, and you're making lists, and it just unraveled this whole big part of the adventure for me. And
it raised the excitement
level.
The whole idea of traveling and just getting out there specifically for the pursuit of birds.
Right.
That's what it brought it up to another level for us.
Right. And so I think that's where we came up with kind of what we define birding as is the pursuit of specific species of birds.
Right.
Once you're
actively getting out in the field.
Where you're, rather than passively identifying birds as they come to you, even if you're putting out an attractant, you're not saying, I'm putting this out so I can bring in this certain bird, but you hear about a species and then you intentionally go to see that species because you haven't listed it yet.
Right.
And, we haven't, when we're talking about listing, it goes from one extreme to the other.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. So
you might be sitting at your house in the backyard and start identifying birds,
right,
and start making a list. These are the birds that I've seen, and this is cool. To us, where we're traveling around specifically trying to see every bird that is possible to see.
Right.
And then another extreme is, like we've talked about, where you have ornithological societies that are tracking migration patterns on specific species and trying to get exact numbers of how many birds are in each area and what they're doing in their nesting habitats. There's all these extreme levels on any way, and you might fall in any one of those and either be just a casual bird watcher or an extreme birder in any one of these categories.
Right.
So.
And I think that you could be extreme in any of those categories, like you said, and I think that listing is an important component of any of them. I think that having even just a little notepad next to your binoculars on the front window and writing down the different things you've seen at your feeder is a good start, because it's fun to say I've seen X number of birds at my feeder the whole time I've lived at this house, or in my yard, or in my town, my county, the state. You can keep those lists. And a popular thing among birders is to reset your lists every year. So every January the 1st, you start your list back at 0, and it's kind of exciting again because you haven't seen any yet that year, and so you go
every
out.
year's brand new.
Yeah. And so how we like to do it is we do a new list every year starting at 0, and then we have a running list for each of us that we call the life list.
Right.
And so a life list is essentially a running list of every new species you've seen. So if you say that you've seen a life bird, it's one that you've not seen or identified at any other point
in your life.
And so that's why we call it a life bird. And so it's really big because it's fun to say, how much you enjoy birding and what you've done to enjoy birding, and you love birding that many numbers, and that's how hard you've worked towards it. And it's not an easy thing to create a bigger and bigger life list. And so it's like constantly having a few running lists, and there's temporary lists that come and go as well. Like, say we've got a big trip plan coming up, and we'll probably do a specific list for just that trip.
Right, just to see what we see.
And so we'll have a trip list, and if any of those on that trip are new for our year, that'll go onto the year list, and if any of those we've never ever seen before, that'll go into our life list. And so you could be tallying the same bird in multiple places just to keep track of it. And some of the more scientific people, they don't care necessarily what they see. They're going out to different locations because they're tracking migrational numbers, and they'll be saying every time they go out, they'll see the same species of birds, but they're listing the number of them.
Right.
I saw 150 coot, and I saw 32 song sparrows, or whatever it is that they do, and they're keeping that data and tracking it online for environmental purposes.
Right,
So.
and it shows changing migration patterns. Like, looking at that information over a course of several decades, you can see how birds that didn't previously exist in this area have moved slowly over the years and expanded their habitat, or moved out of an area because of changes in habitat, things like that.
And so they can use that data to see rising and falling population levels. They can use that data and see if it's affected by something else. So they're not really like making a statement out of it. There's just, here's the data, this is the movement of it over the decades, and take with it what you will. So it's really interesting, and what it does for us, we're talking about that adventure, is it gets you to go and see things that you wouldn't otherwise go and do or see.
It's taken us to all kinds of places that I would have never considered before, just because, what's the point? Why would you go there? There's all these other places to go and different things to do in life, but birding has brought us to mountaintops and valleys and rivers and swamps
out in the middle of the ocean.
all over the place. And it's places you would never go. Like, we went on a specific trip out in the ocean to see bird species that never come into shore, or rarely do. So that trip specifically just for birds is something that I would have never considered before.
Right. Now, it's
mostly because the ocean is scary.
It's a lot easier to sit around inside, and even if you are an outdoorsman, if you go out and you're kayaking, or you like to hike, or you like to camp, or you like to fish, any of those things can be coupled with the taxonomy of birding or any other
Right.
similar thing. But if you're birding while you're camping or rafting or anything like that, suddenly you've got this other thing that is engaging your mind,
Right.
and you start to pay attention to all the sights and sounds, any movement, anything like that. I think it enriches any of your outdoor activities.
Absolutely.
Because
It's just adding to, because you're looking in so many different places that you wouldn't look, and you're listening to all sorts of different noises. Like, I know for me, like, I'm listening to everything that happens and then trying to figure out in my brain all the time, is that a bird? Or is that a bird that I haven't heard before?
Right.
Is that something new?
Yeah, and as I've gone on doing it, I've noticed that, like, if I spend time outdoors with non-birders and birders, I feel like hiking is a really good example for me. I've been hiking multiple times with people who don't give a rip about birds,
Right.
and all they care about is getting from point A to point B, and it might be to look over a vista or something like that, and they'll walk 10 miles to go and look off of something, and they didn't see anything on the way. They
Right.
didn't enjoy anything on the way. They didn't realize that there was anything between point A and point B. It was just,
Right.
to them, the accomplishment happened at the destination. But for a birder, you might walk a mile and it take you the same amount of time to walk 10 miles because you stopped and you enjoyed everything along the way and you paid attention to the small details. And
Every sound, every
Yeah.
little movement. So you're seeing squirrels and mice and bugs and
yeah,
all sorts of little things that just because every little movement is drawing your attention.
that's right.
It just enriches the entire process, the whole journey.
So, anyways, to us, I think that pretty much encompasses what birding is. Everyone will probably have a different definition of it. We didn't look it up on Wikipedia what they
I wonder what they call it.
define birding as. But, I mean, it's such a thing that, most people are interested in birds. Even if they don't know what they are, you might be at the workplace and be like, yeah, I'm into birds. That's what I spend my time doing. And pretty soon they'll start showing up and saying, I saw this. This is what it sounded like. This is what it was. Or here's a picture, and they show you this blurry picture of something on a feeder, and
Right.
they start to identify you as somebody who can identify the birds for them, and you're satisfying this need for them of the unknown.
Right.
And it's bigger than you think. It's a multi-billion-dollar hobby that, it's international.
Absolutely.
There's whole online communities. There's communities in your town, your city, of people that are all like-minded. It's no longer, the sit at the table and little old lady game. It's just something that people of all ages are just obsessed with. And people spend incredible amounts of money going on trips, or they donate huge amounts of money to develop habitats, and there's nature walks and things like that, and you'll notice that all the donations come from different ornithological groups,
Mm-hmm.
and so people not only are inspired by the birds and what they are and what it does for them, but then they're motivated to give back for the birds and make it better for everybody. And it's just become such a huge thing. I moved to Japan and took a job there because I wanted to go see birds in Japan.
Right.
And we went on vacation in Mexico because I wanted to see some birds in Mexico. And I've took jobs that allow me to travel around the country, and I've seen birds all over the place in this country. And it's like I have the means to follow this passion depending on which decisions I make. And once you start to become obsessed, I guarantee you start to make different decisions to better that. You might go on a family vacation to some place that you wouldn't have thought to go on a family vacation before, because you might see 10 or 20 new life birds or something like that. And
Right.
it's just, you got to try and convince your family members that you're not out of your mind.
It's going to be fun at the bog.
Yeah, this swamp is great, I promise. The bugs will be worth it because there's a chance that we'll see some night heron or something like that.
Right.
Um,
So yeah, to us, it's the active pursuit of bird species,
Yeah.
and it's an entire life-changing experience. There's a whole adventure to it. To you, it might be anything else. You know, let us know in the comments. Let us know what you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, it's all for the birds.
Yeah.
So we'll catch you guys on the next one.
All right. Take care, guys.